wondered if you could simplify your homeschool language arts and just use novels to study the subject? If you have, you're in the right place, because I was in that same boat a few years ago when I took the plunge and said, you know what? I can't take these textbooks, these all-inclusive language arts books anymore. And ever since then, we have studied language arts using novels. But a question I think about all the time is it enough? Am I covering the right things as we read through these novels? I think as homeschool parents, we tend to ask these questions about anything, but I think we have strategies that can help us feel confident about our choices. So today in this video, I'm going to do a couple of things to basically quiet that insecure voice. First, I'm going to tell you what we've done over the last couple of years so you can kind of get an overall picture of what I'm talking about as I discuss the other things in this video. Second, I want to do something that might make people feel a little weird, but I want to look at standards. I am not a standard type homeschool mom. I don't necessarily care about them. However, I think there are some people that might be comforted knowing what's in the standards. We're going to take a look at those and we're going to see, okay, is what we're doing meeting similar goals to these standards? I don't think we have to meet them exactly. That's why we homeschool. But I think it's important to maybe just take an overall look and see what it is. So if you're interested in that, pay attention to that part of this video. The other thing I want to do is I want to take a look at some all-inclusive language arts lessons from other curricula in the homeschool community, and I want to compare it to what you might do in a novel study. I think looking at all these things really might make you realize that language arts doesn't have to be so complicated. I am no language arts expert. This is all going to be based on my opinion and my own research. I'm just sharing it with you. So now you have the freedom to take the information I provide you and make your own decision. I'm not telling you any way to go. I'm just providing you with the information that I have looked over. Stick around because we're going to dig deep into this and see how we can make language arts the best we can in our homeschool. I'm Jamie. This is Simply Learning Together. I'm so glad that you're here. I am a homeschooling mom of 4 kids who are ages almost 5, 6, 9, and 11. And this is our 7th year homeschooling. Almost 3 years ago now, I remember talking to my husband, being in the kitchen so frustrated with the language arts curriculum that I was working with. At this point, it was probably the 2nd or 3rd that I had tried. My child was maybe in the 3rd grade, and I just dreaded getting that workbook out. It just felt like a chore. It felt repetitive. It felt pointless. And my child was expressing those same things. You know, why do I practice this? I already know it. Just not really interested in the subject. As I've gotten older, literature has really put a fire in me. I just love it so much. And I want my children to feel that. I want them to love literature. And I love things like writing and reading. And these workbooks just weren't doing it. So I read a couple of books, I did a little bit of research, and basically put together my own type of novel study. I have lots of videos on this if you want to dig deeper, but basically, just to give you a quick overall picture of what we do, is we pick any novel that we want, and I choose a passage for the week. So passage study, you're going to hear that a lot in this video. Through that passage study, spelling, vocabulary, grammar, copy work, then we assess with dictation, and then all throughout the week we are practicing narration, and my older children even practice written narration where they're writing every week based on a story that we have connected to our novel. That's how we're touching all these different parts of language arts. Now that you have an idea about that, let's dive in. What is language arts? You can find all kinds of definitions online. You can find something in the dictionary, you can find something on a standards website, you can find stuff on homeschooling websites. When people define it, they put it into categories, and most of those categories include reading, writing, speaking, and listening. It will also include some subcategories. This might be alphabet, phonics, references, grammar, punctuation, vocabulary, spelling. It just can incorporate a lot of different things. And I think that's probably what overwhelms people so much, is because you really can put a lot of pieces into these categories. But I think knowing the definition is important, especially if you're thinking about kind of taking your own route. It can really help you figure out, okay, what exactly do I need to accomplish here? As a homeschooler, you definitely want to make sure that you're following your state laws. So be sure you know what those are. Go to the HSLDA website and figure out what you need to reach your goals for language arts. I'm actually in Texas, so I have a lot of freedom when it comes to choosing what I want to teach in my homeschool. In the next part of this video, I want to take a look at the standards. And I'm actually going to look at the standards of my own state. And the reason being is because that's what applies to me. Even though it might not be the same standards in your state, I think it can still be helpful to look at these standards, because it's really just going to show you, okay, here's what's required, what am I doing? And that's the point of this. I'm just sharing you how I would personally do my own research if I wanted to kind of create my own language arts, which is what we do. Okay, so these are the standards for Texas, and I'm actually looking at grade 6 because that's what grade my child is in. You might have someone that's in a younger grade, so it might not be as advanced as this, but remember, the point is just to kind of look and see overall what we're doing. Already, I can point you out to here's these 4 words I mentioned: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Those are the categories that will be presented to you. Now, if we scroll down here, this is basically the introduction at the top, and then we get into the knowledge and skills. I'm not going to read every single one of these to you because you can read yourself, you can pause the video, or you can look at them online, but I do want to point a few things out. If you notice number 1, it says developing and sustaining foundational language skills: listening, speaking, discussion, and thinking, oral language. All of this can be done in discussion through your novels. So if you're reading the novel and asking questions about it, all of these things can be met through that discussion. Here it talks about an organized presentation. If that was important to you to meet every single standard, then that is something that you could do. You could add in to reach this one. Here it talks about doing a student-led discussion, talking in groups. This might be something amongst your family members if you wanted to try that. But like I said, we're not trying to meet every single one. We're just trying to see, okay, what goals are we trying to reach here? Let's move on. This is focusing on vocabulary. When you read a novel, I don't think you need anyone to tell you vocabulary. When you read, if there's a word that you think your children might want to know, you can talk about it. You can look up the definition. You can look up the history of a word. Okay, you can learn how to pronounce words. There's so many things that you can do when you study words in a novel guide. And what's great is you're actually looking at words that you want to know, that they have meaning to you. Here it's going to talk about Greek and Latin roots. This can be, you can look at that through your vocabulary studies. I have a story to tell you something about this, just so you can see that this doesn't have to be complicated. Just the other day, I was quizzing my daughter, going over some vocabulary words from my daughter's science textbook. She's a 9-year-old. I believe the word was plantigrades. I could be wrong, and I might be pronouncing it wrong. But it has to do with animals that walk on the whole bottom of their feet, right? And in that conversation, I said to her, hey, you know what? Did you know when you get a wart on your foot, it's called a planter's wart? And also, did you know when that arch of your foot kind of has that pain? And I said, remember what happened to your sister? That's called plantar fasciitis. Do you recognize something in those words that are the same? And she found that plant part of the word, right? Well, come to find out, the Latin root planta or planta, however you would pronounce it, that it means sole of the foot. Okay, so I don't think everything has to be so like structured all the time. Like, how meaningful is that to her that she can now connect it to all those things and do that for science? Her dad did the same thing the week before when they were talking about epidermis and dermis, and he told her, hey, you remember the dermatologist? So that there are so many different ways that you can study words without having it to be so serious. Do what's meaningful to you. All right, let's get back. All right, so we're moving along here. The next thing we're getting to is this number 3. We're going to talk about fluency. The student reads grade level text with fluency and comprehension. That can be done with the books that they're reading on their own. Here we're talking about self-sustained reading. They can read text independently for a sustained period of time. These are all things that you can see in your home without somebody telling you how to do it, in my personal opinion. Next, we've got comprehension skills here, okay? Now, all the subjects that you cover, you can be doing this, whether you're reading your novel, your history book, your science book. And it's talking about asking questions, deepening understanding, getting to know the genres and what that's like, creating mental images. That can easily be done by saying, how do you picture this setting, whatever that might be. Making connections to personal experiences. Have you ever felt like this before? These are the kinds of questions you can ask. Making inferences, making predictions. All of these things can be done in your discussion. Next, we get down to response skills, which I personally think can be reached through narration and written narration. We're talking about making personal connections. We're talking about writing responses, using text evidence to support a response. You can read through all of this here. It gets a little official in my opinion, but I think basically you are taking what you've read and responding to it appropriately. Next, we're looking at multiple genres. This can be just simply making sure you're not reading a fantasy novel every time you study a novel. Bounce around, try historical fiction, try mystery, try a nonfiction text at some point. Hit each different genre, talk about them, respond to them, ask questions about them, and you're going to reach all of these things. You're also the more you read, the more you're going to get to know the different types of genres and what they contain. This gets into more of what the genres are and how they are put together. So maybe you want to make a point and talk to your children about what the genre is and why it is in that genre. That's going to hit it here. I noticed that poetry comes up in this category as well. I think just exposure through poetry is going to be fantastic. We read poetry every day in my house, and my kids love to write poetry on their own. One day we might do a unit on poetry or study a poet, which we have done in the past also. So you can see how that can kind of hit these as well. Next, we run into author's purpose. Here you can think about theme, you can think about point of view, you can think about how they're setting up these characters or drawing pictures or using figurative language. And all of this can be done as you discuss a text. Here you have the official language for you as well, but a question as simple as, who's the one telling this story? Or what do you think the author is trying to teach you in this chapter? These are simple questions that meet these goals. Then we get into writing. I don't necessarily follow what writing is in the standards, so this would not apply to me, and we can talk more about that. But if you do want to look at that, here we have what the writing skills are. And also, when you get down here, it's going to talk about the different grammar things to cover. So, if you had a novel and you wanted to study a passage, well, let's take a look. What are conjunctive adverbs? What are prepositions? What are pronouns? And find them in those passages and work on, being able to recognize these things in the passages this year. And if you can recognize them in the text, then you can put them in your writing better as well. Okay, here we're going to have actually writing things, composing literary texts, informational texts. Like I said, I don't necessarily follow this. I am working on a different kind of philosophy for writing, but if you wanted to add these in, you could do that on your own or through some supplemental writing if that is what you wanted. Here we have inquiry and research. Now, this I think you can do. You don't just have to be so zoned into language arts. You can do a research project in your history subject or your science subject, and you can hit all of these things. And, spend a month researching somebody in your history, and then boom, 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 this section is done. So you can see, when you're looking through that was the end. Did you see that? But when you're looking through all of these, you're not going to do this all day, every day. You're going to break this up into different parts and work on them individually. I don't know about you, but when I read through that, I know the language gets fancy and it feels really official, but as I read through it, I think to myself, oh yeah, we do that through our discussion. Or I ask them questions about what we read all the time. Or yeah, we talk about figurative language. Or yes, my children are responding by writing about what we read or telling me about what we read. So, and are they doing it every single day of the week? No, but all throughout the week, we have certain rhythms that meet these things. Plus, we're doing grammar, we're learning how to write, we're being exposed to good writing. So, I always just, when I look at that, it's kind of like, okay, everything's going to be just fine. You just have to get over the fancy language, Okay, so next I want to show you a lesson in a curriculum that kind of advertises as all inclusive. Everything is included that you need for language arts. And so, something that can be really popular amongst homeschoolers is the good and the beautiful. This is not me saying anything bad about the good and the beautiful. I have used them in the past. I am using a piece of their supplemental curriculum right now as we speak. So I have nothing against them. I just think it can be simpler and more enjoyable than what they provide. So we're going to take a look at a lesson, and then we'll probably take a look at one more just to kind of have multiple pieces of evidence, and then we'll go from there. Look at this level 6 course book. Remember, I'm focusing on grade 6. That is what is relevant to me, and that is kind of where we are just putting our attention as we go through this video. You can see here, these are the subjects it wants to hit. Now, as we go through, I want you to take a look at something. Here we have at a glance. So they are adding in other subjects, art and geography. That has nothing to do with language arts. Then we've got grammar, reading, writing, and literature, and writing. Okay. And then here we have poetry. So like I said, that could be a separate poetry unit if you wanted to kind of do something on your own or study an actual poet. Now, when we go in here, they're going to talk about the subjects that they cover here. And we're scrolling through here. I found something I wanted to show you. Here it talks about spelling dictation, which I mentioned what we do in our novel studies, and I'll get more into that in a minute, but they practice spelling through dictation. And notice it's also going to practice grammar and punctuation principles through dictation. That's why it's such a good assessment when it comes to spelling, and that's why I love doing it in our own novel guides. Okay, so then we've got writing, poetry, memorization. Here we have their spelling lists. Hang on. Okay, I found this to be really helpful. This is the level 6 reference sheet. And notice these are all different things for grammar. So if you wanted, they offer this for free. Download this and use it as your guide. Have you taught your child pronouns? Have you taught them adjectives? And I mean, you could just go through. If the good and the beautiful is going to provide you with a free list, why not use it? Okay, but this is what they want to hit. They even give you an example. Find these in your novel passages, and then boom, you're done. Okay, and plus you can remember it even better because you're reading a book that has actual meaning to you. Here we have some literary figures, alliteration, hyperbole, and so on. Look for these in your novels and check them off as you go. I love this. I think I might print it off myself. Okay, so see how awesome it is to just do some research and figure some things out? So I love that about the good and the beautiful. Now, we're going to take a look at a lesson. Let's not do lesson 1. Let me actually scroll down to like somewhere in the middle just so we can see kind of like a decent lesson. Okay, not that 1 isn't decent, but here we go. Okay, this is lesson 28. It's going to start with spelling, looking at words to practice. Here is the dictation, okay? Reading out loud to the parent. Your child can read a novel to you, or they can read a picture book to you, anything. This has them reading this piece right here. All right.
But you don't have to read that. They can read anything out loud. Next, they're focusing on run-on sentences. It looks like that's their grammar focus for that day. Here, and commas with dependent clauses. But notice, these are just random sentences. I find that practicing grammar through sentences that have meaning to you actually stick a little bit better and make more sense, and they're more interesting. All right, then we've got poetry. Read poetry daily or study a poet for a few weeks. This is where we get into their art and geography. That was the whole lesson. Wow. What did I miss? Oh my goodness. Okay, well that was a quick lesson. All right, let's look at another one. Let's go down here. Okay. Okay, here it looks like they're reading a chapter book. They're reading a novel. You're reading chapter 2 and you're creating an outline of the chapter. If you know how to do narration, you don't really need an outline because your narration can do that for you, or even a written narration. Let's see. Then we've got spelling again with the dictation, reading out loud again. Here we have prepositional phrases. Here is the grammar part of the lesson. And then this is painting. I really do love that they study paintings and the good and the beautiful. And then we've got reading on their own and a numbered outline. Once again, you could teach an outline if you wanted, but I prefer written narration. So this must be when they get into the actual novel, and that's why these lessons are super short. Let's get out of the novel. Okay, here we go. Spelling. We're dictating sentences again. We're reading out loud again. We're looking at 2 words and when to use them in the right way. Here we have poetry again. This time we're studying a poet. Then we have some questions, some comprehension questions about that, where we practice comprehension. Diagramming sentences. I personally think that's a parent preference on what to, if you want to teach your child to diagram sentences. But did you know that you can actually just purchase like a diagramming unit if you'd like, if that's something you want to include? Let's see. Here are more poems by this author. So once again, I mention doing a poetry unit, and that helps you reach these goals of looking at a poet and their different patterns and what they write about, and getting to know their style. Okay, so I feel like we've looked at multiple lessons here and have really been able to see kind of what this is.
Okay, do you feel better or worse after seeing all of that? I love looking at curriculum because I feel like it increases my knowledge. When I see that, I think to myself, okay, I'm reaching those things through my novel guides. You imagine language arts to be this complicated subject, and did you hear what I said when I looked at the first lesson? I thought, that's it? Are you serious? Instead of just looking at random sentences, let's look at sentences in our novel, right? And we can find that same thing. Did you love that reference guide for the grammar? I did. I think I might print that out, okay? So, use tools to help you teach language arts how you want to teach it. Okay, that was one. This next curriculum I've never used before, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at it because I can get a lesson online. I can pull up a sample for us to look at just so we can kind of see a comparison and see, okay, are we doing what we need to do? Okay, let's look.
Next, we're going to look at language lessons for a living education. I'm not picking on master books. It's just I can download a free lesson online to look at. So let's use it as a tool to help us. Now, let me scroll down a second. Here we have our course objectives. So you can see here, understand 8 parts of speech, master the state of being, verbs, action verbs, possessive nouns. You can read through all of these, okay? But this is what they're going to be focusing on. And ask yourself, can you use a novel to do those same things? Okay. I do believe in this course, their writing is separate. So like you have to purchase something different. That's what it looked like at a glance. Let's take a look at a lesson. Okay, here is lesson 18. Okay, so somewhere in the middle. The first thing they're going to do is the Bible study and then retell the Bible account. That's narration right there. Copying a verse, that's copy work. Drawing a picture. Okay, fact or fiction. We're looking at different types of things here. Can you cover this in a novel? Okay, Can you talk about that as you read stories? Because they're just wanting you to tell what fact and fiction is. And personally, this is overkill to me. Write a very short story that is based on a fact. Tell me a child that will love filling up these lines. And, instead, why don't you just ask your child, hey, can you give me a fact on something that you did this week? Can you tell me a factual story? Okay, can you tell me a fictional story about your week? So, that's what you're doing here. Can you do that in your novel studies? Here's a review. Notice we are still, was this 86? Yeah. Okay, so this is what the day 2 lesson is. Singular subject, singular verb. So we're hitting grammar on this day. And notice you're just writing random sentences. Draw a line from these words. I feel like these words are kind of mixed up a lot. If you find them in your passages, you can use them to study. Or sometimes you have a grammar reference book that will give you a list of words that are tricky. I have one I can recommend to you. But look for those in your passages and talk about their meaning. Here we're doing the same thing, more grammar. Now we're talking about adverbs. Write a sentence, write a sentence, write a sentence, write. Oh, goodness gracious me. Okay. Write a sentence using a simile. This is the review. Okay, so here we're looking at a review lesson here. This is a lot of writing, but let's focus on what's important here. Simile, metaphor, personification, oxymoron, hyperbole. These are those literary figures again. So, and they're the same ones that we saw in The Good and the Beautiful. So have we hit these in our novel study? Are we looking for these in the stories? Make sure we know the definition and we're keeping a lookout for them. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so here we're talking about genres, specifically Bible genres. And then, we're sorting them here. And then we've got spelling review. That's with flashcards, spelling games, and creating a dictionary. Okay, we're going to go to this lesson 1 because it's not a review. I want you to see a non-review lesson. So here, this seems to be the same. Then we've got analogy, looking at different analogies of words. I use a supplemental grammar curricula alongside my novel studies, and they cover these analogies. We can keep going. Notice it says independent reading here. Okay, grammar practice. We're covering grammar with this. Writing sentences. The different kinds of sentences. You can recognize these kinds of sentences in a passage of a novel. Here you're writing examples. All right, we're on day 4 of the week. Notice there's more reading comprehension. This is give an oral report. Okay, if you use oral narration regularly, that to me is an oral report. You can make it official and do it at supper for dad or grandma. Okay, here they're talking about syllables. This is for spelling. When you look at spelling words in your passages, you can pay attention to syllables and how it helps you to spell them better. Okay, but here's how it does it in this Masterbooks curriculum. And these are the words. All right. Okay, that was lesson 1. Okay, did you see some patterns? So you can see now you've looked at standards, you've looked at a curriculum from The Good and the Beautiful, you've looked at Masterbooks curriculum. There are so many other curricula that you could look at and just go look at a sample and see what they cover. And think about that, if you want to do novel studies, can you hit these same topics? The next thing I want to jump into is I want to show you kind of how we do our novel guides and how we reach these goals using just the novels, okay? Now, I can tell you that you can do this all on your own. Yes, I have these guides available for you, but you do not need them. You can do the same pattern you want with any novel of your choosing. So stick around and I'm going to show you just how we do this. Step 1 is picking a novel. Pick something you want to read. Pick something you think your kids will love. I like to read to my kids before bed. That's usually when we fit it in, but if you have like an afternoon reading time or a morning reading time, you can do that as well. I aim to read a chapter a day. If they're really short, I might read 2. And that's just kind of a pattern we have set in our family. We've been reading before bed
since my kids were itty bitty. Okay. So that is the reading out loud. I normally read it to them, and they enjoy that. My kids do their own personal reading before bed. They know they have to read something before bed. So that's that independent reading. Check. Okay. As we read, I ask questions about what we're reading. A lot of it just comes from my own head. Maybe I might say something like, oh man, how do you think he feels that happened? So we're getting to know the characters. We're responding to the text. That all can be covered through the novel. When we're done with the chapter, I ask for a narration. And since it's before bedtime, it's usually pretty simple. I might just say something, can you tell me something about this chapter? And they'll tell me about what happens. I also make sure that when we start the next chapter the next night, they can recall what we read the night before. So I'll say something like, okay, what did we read last night? And they tell me, so we're making those connections, okay? So that is what we're doing for reading the book. The actual work for the novel we do during our homeschool day. And I have formed kind of like a pattern to do that. So first, I select a passage from the chapters that we're reading that week. And I have a video where I walk you through all of this, through an entire novel, if you're interested. But just to kind of quickly tell you, I just choose a passage and that's our focus. So we look at that passage on the first day and I focus on spelling and vocabulary. So I choose words from that passage. I do this with 2 different girls. So they have different words from the passage. I pick it at their level. I choose words for spelling, and then we go over vocabulary words in that passage. Now, those are just specific vocabulary words, but if I'm reading the novel and I come across a word that I think they don't know, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to say, what do you think that word means? And see if they can tell me. And if they can't, I'm going to say, listen to the sentence again. Now, can you tell me? And if they can't, I'm going to tell them. And there's our vocabulary lesson, or I'm going to have them look it up. And so, vocabulary does not have to be this matching or these crosswords. It can just be in discussion. We're expanding our vocabulary by reading more and more books and talking about them. On the next day, we focus on grammar. Now, grammar is a little funny for me. I get uncomfortable with grammar because I'm just not very confident in it. So I like to use a supplemental grammar curriculum that kind of guides me. So for example, if I'm teaching my child nouns in her grammar workbook, then when we get to our passage that week, I'm going to look for nouns in the passage and we're going to find them. Not only are they getting that supplement of their grammar review workbooks, but they are also looking at a passage and finding some grammar lessons in that passage as well. The third day of the week, I focus on writing. And this is for my older children. My younger ones, they listen, all of my kids listen to the novel, but only my 2 oldest kids do writing. So we've been doing oral narration for a long time. If you want to hear more about my writing style, which I've mentioned a couple of times in this video, check out I have a couple of videos on written narration. Check those out. But I have them once a week. I choose a picture book that is related to the novel. Now, you could just have them write about the novel, but I like to just kind of pick a picture book because it kind of expands the unit, right? And it also, I feel like a picture book is just easier to write about. And honestly, a little bit more fun. Let me give you an example. A video I have on here walking you through a novel, it's over Trumpet of the Swan. So I read The Ugly Duckling one day. And so we read it and then they write about it. And so that's how we get writing practice every single week. My oldest child, who's been practicing written narration over a couple years, she now writes across multiple subjects. So she's now writing about her history lessons and her science lessons and the little picture books that we're reading. So she is doing written narration 4 to 5 times a week at this point. So even though I told you guys I'm not looking at the standards for writing, she's writing all the time. We're just doing it in a different method. Check out those written narration videos. Okay, so you got first day, spelling, vocabulary. Second day, we focus on grammar. The third day, we focus on writing. The fourth day, we focus on dictation. And so I take all the spelling the spelling words, that's how they're gonna get assessed, is through their dictation. So I take that passage that we've been looking at all week and I read it out loud to them. Now, it's important when you read the passage to them at the beginning of the week to kind of point out the punctuation. Oh, wow, why do you think this comma is here? Why do you think this hyphen is here? And talking about that and just looking at it. How does this change the way that we read? Because when you do that, they're starting to recognize things. They're getting exposed to good writing. So then when they do their dictation, they're kind of being forced to remember those skills, and you see if they can. And that's how they get better and better and apply all those things to their own writing. All throughout the week, every day, they are writing that passage as well. So they're getting practice through that. I didn't mention it. They're doing it as copy work. So, Monday they'll write a couple of lines. Tuesday they'll write a couple more lines until they get the whole passage written by the end of the week. So that's how our novel studies go, and that's how we kind of reach all these different goals. I'm reading all kinds of literature to them. Currently, we're reading a historical fiction novel. We're reading Sign of the Beaver. My next novel is The Wizard of Oz. That is my newest novel guide. I'm going to link it here for you below. But I'm so excited to start that one as well. It's such a fun book. But we've read all kinds of novels together as a family, and we just kind of explore it in different ways. And I feel like it's just been so much more meaningful than if we were to just open up a textbook and do a 20-minute lesson over random things. Does that make sense? Now, we're not necessarily getting poetry from our novels, but like I said, study a poet for a month, instead of reading a novel. And then you've got your poetry. Later in the spring, I want to bring in a Shakespeare play, which we did last year, and it was so much fun. So we're going to add in some Shakespeare, and that's really going to challenge us, but I love it. It's so fun. So it's really just an exposure to all different kinds of readings. So when you think about the different categories of language arts, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, we're doing that almost daily. And then the different subcategories, spelling, vocabulary, reading comprehension, handwriting, all those things we're kind of focusing in on each day of the week, trying to make sure that we hit them and practice them regularly as we read through the novel. So then the next week I'll choose a new passage and we'll have something new to write. What's funny is it is meaningful. I mean, I give my kids the passage, and then when I read it out loud and they hear the passage as I'm reading the chapter, they'll go, "Oh, that's it." They like to find it. Okay, but how cool is that to have that connection with the passage, and then to really dig deep into it instead of just a random sentence or a matching activity. Okay, I feel like I threw a lot of information at you, and I feel like this video got kind of long. However, I wanted to provide you with evidence, with research, and just with a little bit of my heart. I hated pulling out language arts workbooks. I just did not like it. With my oldest daughter, we have had the best time learning language arts through novels. And then now my second daughter, we've put her in the mix as well. She's 9, and I have so much enjoyed doing it with her as well. And I've even had to tell myself, like, you don't need these extra things. Look at the novel. Use the novel. It's the most meaningful part. I felt like myself at the beginning of the year trying to add some supplemental stuff, because she needed it. But I think what I'm doing is I'm interrupting that connection. I'm messing that up. And so my hope in this next 6 weeks or so is to really just go back to focusing on the passages, which is what I do with my oldest daughter. So we've really just had a fun time. I use these same strategies when I teach my little ones. We do this through picture books, and I call them picture book studies. We read one book a week, and we focus on these same skills. So you guys, do you need a language arts workbook? I told you I'm not going to tell you. You get to decide, okay? But I've given you the evidence that I have. I've kind of shared with you my experience. I've looked at language arts programs, and like I said, I have nothing against those. You heard what I liked about them. They had some good stuff in there. But I do ask myself, can I do this through a novel instead? Something that really means more to me, The other thing I think about too is maybe you don't want to take the big leap. Maybe you don't want to let go of that textbook because you really want something to guide you. If that's the case, maybe do a unit in your textbook and then do a novel, and then go back and do a unit. Now, you're going to interrupt your schedule. You might not finish the textbook in a year, but if that doesn't bother you, go for it, okay? So I feel like you have a lot of different options. Another thing I like to suggest is doing it during one of your breaks. Like if you take a lighter Christmas schedule, like in December, maybe read a book together, read a novel together, and see how that goes, or a summertime read or something like that. So definitely give it a shot, because it really just livens up the subject. It makes it so interesting and so fun. And my kids love reading. They love literature, and they respond to it in a completely different way than I ever would have growing up. I hope this information helps you. I really do. I hope you find it useful, and I hope you find it educational. And like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm just a mom. But this is how I kind of make myself feel better, is looking at these things and figuring out, am I doing the right thing for my kids? And when I look at all these things, I confidently can say, yes, we are. All right, if you have questions, leave them in the comments.